The courtroom was silent. Not just quiet, silent. The kind of silence that wraps itself around the walls, trapping every breath, every movement, in invisible chains. All eyes were on the judge, a man with thick-rimmed glasses and a silver mustache, his lips twisted into a smirk. He tapped his gavel twice. "Young man," he drawled, looking down at the teenage boy standing before him. "I don't know if you wandered in here by accident, or if this is some kind of ridiculous joke, but I have no time for games." Soft murmurs rippled through the crowd. Some people whispered. Others chuckled. The judge leaned forward, eyes glinting with mockery. "Do you even know what a courtroom is for, boy? Or did you just wake up this morning and decide you'd like to play dress-up?" The teenage boy didn't flinch. His face was calm. His dark brown eyes, sharp as knives, locked onto the judge's. He wasn't trembling. He wasn't backing down. "Your Honor," he said, voice smooth and measured. "You assume too much. And that, sir, is your first mistake." The murmurs in the courtroom stopped. Someone gasped. The judge's smirk faltered for just a second. But then, he chuckled, shaking his head. "Oh, this is rich," the judge said, turning to the audience as if they were all in on the joke. "A teenager, probably still failing math, thinks he can talk to me like that. You know what, kid? You amuse me." He leaned back in his chair. "Go ahead. Let's see this little act of yours." The boy's lips curled ever so slightly. He reached into his pocket, pulled out a piece of paper, and unfolded it slowly. And then, the courtroom doors burst open. The audience whipped their heads around. A group of suited lawyers rushed inside, their faces pale. One of them, a woman with jet-black hair, locked eyes with the teenage boy. "Stop this immediately," she shouted. "He's—" But before she could finish her sentence, boom, the gavel slammed down, and everything changed. The morning had started like any other. Noah Carter adjusted his tie in front of the cracked mirror in his tiny bedroom. It wasn't much of a room, just a mattress on the floor, a small wooden desk, and a single window that barely let in the sunlight. But he didn't care. He had bigger things to focus on. Today was the day. He grabbed his backpack, filled with legal books most kids his age wouldn't even glance at, and headed for the door. As he stepped out into the cold morning air, his little sister, Lily, came running up to him. "Noah," she called, her blonde curls bouncing as she ran. "You forgot your lunch." He smiled, ruffling her hair as she handed him a brown paper bag. "Thanks, Lily," he said. She pouted. "Are you coming home early today?" Noah hesitated. He wanted to say yes, but he knew the truth. "I'll try," he said, forcing a smile. Lily sighed. "You always say that." He bent down to her level, looking her straight in the eyes. "I promise, okay?" She still didn't look convinced, but she nodded. "Okay." With that, he turned and walked off, his mind already racing with everything he needed to do. Most kids his age were in school, dealing with pop quizzes and lunchroom drama. But Noah Carter had been different his whole life. Ever since he was little, he'd had a mind like a steel trap, absorbing information like a sponge. He didn't just read books. He understood them, analyzed them, dissected them. And the law? That was his obsession. By the time he was 13, he had already read more legal documents than some practicing attorneys. By 14, he had started secretly studying court cases. Now, at 15, he was about to do something that had never been done before. He was going to step into a courtroom and defend someone. And he wasn't just defending anyone. He was defending Mr. Jameson, the kind old man who owned the bookstore down the street, a man who had been wrongly accused of a crime he didn't commit. Noah had spent months researching, studying, preparing, but he hadn't told anyone. No one believed a kid like him could do something like this. Even now, as he walked up the courthouse steps, people gave him strange looks. A security guard stopped him at the entrance. "Hey, kid, this isn't a place for school projects." Noah pulled out a neatly folded piece of paper from his pocket and handed it over. The guard's expression changed as he read it. His eyes flicked back up to Noah, confusion etched on his face. "You're serious?" Noah just nodded. The guard hesitated, then let him through. Inside, the courthouse smelled like old paper and polished wood. Lawyers bustled around, talking in hushed voices. Noah kept his head high and walked with confidence, just like he had practiced in front of his mirror 100 times. When he finally entered the courtroom, he saw Mr. Jameson sitting at the defendant's table, looking lost. Across from him, the prosecutor, a tall man in a sharp suit, glanced at Noah and smirked. And then, the judge entered. The moment Judge Whitaker sat down and saw Noah standing there, his smirk appeared. And that's how it had all begun. The mocking, the laughter, the disbelief. The judge had no idea who he was dealing with. And just as Noah was about to reveal the truth, the courtroom doors had burst open, and everything changed. The moment the doors slammed open, the room shifted. It was like a storm had blown in, carrying tension on its winds. The group of lawyers who had just entered looked frantic, their faces tight with urgency. Judge Whitaker's smirk faded as he turned toward the disturbance. "Excuse me," he said, tapping his gavel sharply. "What is the meaning of this?" The woman at the front of the group, the one with jet black hair and a tailored navy blue suit, didn't even acknowledge him. Her sharp green eyes locked onto Noah. "You," she breathed, shaking her head slightly. "I knew I recognized that name." Noah stood tall, expression unreadable. "Ms. Reynolds," he greeted smoothly. The prosecutor, who had been watching with amusement just moments ago, stiffened at the name. Judge Whitaker narrowed his eyes. "Wait a minute. You know this kid?" Reynolds exhaled, pinching the bridge of her nose. "I need a word with the court now." Whitaker huffed. "That's not how this works. Who do you think you are, storming into my courtroom?" "Your Honor," she interrupted, her voice firm. "You need to listen to me." The judge leaned back in his chair, unimpressed. "Oh, do I?" He folded his arms. "Because from where I'm sitting, this child just walked into my courtroom and expects me to take him seriously. Now, unless someone can explain why this—" "Enough," Noah said. The room fell silent. It wasn't the volume of his voice that commanded attention. It was the way he said it, the authority in his tone, the confidence of a man twice his age. Judge Whitaker's nostrils flared. "Watch yourself, boy." Noah lifted the paper in his hands, the same one he had pulled from his pocket before the interruption. He unfolded it, smoothed it out, and held it up for everyone to see. "This," he said, "is a legal motion, filed, signed, and accepted by the court clerk." Whitaker's brow furrowed. He reached out, and a clerk hurried forward to take the document from Noah and pass it up to him. As he scanned the page, his face changed. The amusement drained from his expression. His smirk twitched, then vanished altogether. He looked back up, staring at Noah as if seeing him for the first time. The prosecutor, who had been chuckling earlier, leaned forward now, his fingers tightening on the table. The audience held their breath. Ms. Reynolds tilted her head, watching the judge carefully. And then, "Order!" Whitaker barked, slamming his gavel down. The room jumped. His voice was tight, controlled, but there was something else there now. Not confidence, not amusement, something closer to unease. The energy in the room shifted again. Noah said nothing. He didn't move. He just watched. And for the first time that morning, Judge Whitaker looked concerned. Hours earlier, Noah had been sitting in the old bookstore, flipping through legal documents while Mr. Jameson paced back and forth. "They're saying I stole the money," the old man muttered, running a wrinkled hand through his thin gray hair. "I didn't take a dime, Noah. You know me." "I do," Noah replied without looking up. He turned a page, scanning through case law at lightning speed. "That's why I'm here," Mr. Jameson sighed, sinking into the chair across from him. "I don't get it, kid. You should be playing video games, chasing after girls, doing whatever it is kids do these days. Not studying this." He gestured to the mountain of legal documents on the table. Noah finally looked up, his expression unreadable. "Mr. Jameson," he said slowly, "how long have you known me?" The old man frowned. "Since you were a little thing. Maybe 4 or 5. You'd sit in that corner over there, reading books way too big for your age." Noah nodded. "And in all those years, have I ever done things the way people expect?" Jameson chuckled. "Can't say you have. Then why start now?" The old man sighed, rubbing his forehead. "I just don't want you getting into trouble over this, Noah. You're young. If you push too hard, They'll tear you down. Noah leaned forward, lacing his fingers together. His brown eyes burned with something fierce. They can try. Mr. Jameson studied him for a long moment, then exhaled. You're a strange kid, Noah Carter. Noah smirked. That's what they tell me. Now, standing in the courtroom, he watched as Judge Whitaker's fingers tightened around the motion he had just read. The man's jaw was clenched, his gaze unreadable. The prosecutor cleared his throat. Your Honor, surely we're not. Whitaker held up a hand. Quiet. The prosecutor immediately shut his mouth. Ms. Reynolds crossed her arms. So, she said, are we still laughing at the kid? Whitaker ignored her. His gaze flicked back to Noah. Where did you get this? Noah arched a brow. Do you really want to ask me that? The judge stared at him. Then, slowly, he exhaled. Counsel approached the bench. Noah walked forward, not hesitating for a second. When he reached the judge, Whitaker lowered his voice. I don't know what game you're playing, kid, but this isn't a joke. Noah didn't blink. I agree. That's why I'm here. Whitaker's fingers twitched against the wood of the bench. You think you can just walk in here and practice law? Noah shrugged. The law doesn't say I can't. The judge's face darkened. That's not how this works, isn't it? Noah tilted his head. Because according to the motion in your hand, it is how this works. Or are you saying the law doesn't apply in your courtroom? A sharp silence followed. Whitaker inhaled through his nose. Then, finally, he leaned back. Fine, he said, loud enough for the courtroom to hear. Let's see what you've got, Mr. Carter. Gasps rippled through the audience. Mr. Jameson's mouth fell open. The prosecutor looked like he had swallowed a lemon. And Noah? He simply smiled. The real battle had just begun. The courtroom sat in stunned silence. The words had barely left Judge Whitaker's mouth, yet they hung in the air, heavy and electrifying. Let's see what you've got, Mr. Carter. Noah's heart pounded, but not from nerves. From excitement. This was the moment he had been waiting for. The moment everyone in this room would realize he wasn't some kid playing dress-up. He was here to win. He stepped back to the defense table, placing his hands on the smooth wooden surface. Across from him, the prosecutor, Mr. Daniels, was still staring at the judge as if he had gone insane. Your Honor, Daniels began, voice tight. Surely, we're not allowing— We are, Whitaker interrupted. The motion is legally sound. His eyes flicked to Noah. For now, Daniels scoffed. This is ridiculous. He's 15. Noah smirked. 15 and standing across from you in court, counselor. That should tell you something. Soft chuckles rippled through the audience. Even Ms. Reynolds raised a brow, clearly amused. Daniels' jaw clenched. He turned to the judge again. You can't be serious. Whitaker sighed. I don't like it either, Daniels, but the law is the law. The motion is valid. I don't have a choice. Noah knew that wasn't true. The judge did have a choice. He could have delayed, argued, or called for an appeal. But something in Whitaker's expression told Noah the truth. This was no longer about what was legal. It was about pride. Whitaker had been embarrassed in his own courtroom. He wasn't about to admit he had misjudged the situation. Instead, he was going to test Noah, to push him, watch him stumble, and prove to everyone that a teenage boy had no business standing in a courtroom. Fine by me. Noah adjusted his tie. Let's begin, then. The judge nodded stiffly and turned to Daniels. Prosecution, proceed. Daniels exhaled sharply, rubbing his temples before walking to the jury. He straightened his shoulders, gathering himself. Then, his smirk returned. Ladies and gentlemen, he began, turning toward the 12 jurors. This is an open and shut case. He gestured toward Mr. Jameson, who sat nervously at the defense table. The defendant, Mr. Jameson, was caught on security footage withdrawing money from a closed business account, an account that only he had access to. Daniels turned, walking slowly. Now, the defense might try to convince you otherwise. They might spin a dramatic tale. But facts don't lie. The evidence is clear. He stopped and smiled. And let's not forget, the defense attorney today is a child. Laughter rippled through the courtroom. Daniels grinned, pleased with himself. I mean, honestly, what are we doing here? Are we really going to sit here and pretend this is a serious legal defense? He turned to Noah, arms crossed. Do you even know what a subpoena is, kid? Noah didn't move, didn't flinch, didn't blink. Then, he tilted his head. Would you like the definition according to state law, federal law, or case precedent? Because I can give you all three. Daniel's smirk slipped. Noah clasped his hands behind his back. And for the record, attempting to discredit an opposing counsel based on age instead of facts is called an ad hominem argument. It's also a sign that you don't have a strong case. The audience murmured. Daniel's face darkened. Noah smiled slightly. Please continue, counselor. Daniels turned, stiffly walking back to his table. The prosecution rests. Whitaker exhaled. Defense, you may present your case. Noah stepped forward, buttoning his suit jacket. Thank you, Your Honor. He turned to the jury, studying them for a brief moment before speaking. The prosecution claims this is an open and shut case. He gestured toward Mr. Jameson. That the defendant is guilty because he was caught on camera withdrawing money. He let the words settle before raising a finger. But there's just one problem. A pause. Then, the footage is fake. Gasps erupted. Even the judge straightened in his seat. Daniel scoffed. That's absurd. Are you saying we fabricated evidence? Noah turned, unfazed. Not you. But someone did. Daniels rolled his eyes. Oh, right. And do you have any proof? Noah smiled. I do. He reached into his bag, pulling out a thick folder and walking toward the clerk's desk. He handed it over. These are the original timestamps from the bank security system. You'll notice something interesting. The clerk passed the papers up to the judge. Whitaker frowned as he read. Daniel sighed. What exactly am I supposed to be looking at, kid? Noah glanced at him. Look at the timestamps on the footage your office submitted. Daniel snatched his copy from his table, flipping through the pages. Then, suddenly, his face changed. Noah's smirk grew. See it now? Daniels quickly masked his shock, shaking his head. This doesn't mean anything. Noah turned to the jury. The prosecution submitted security footage as their main piece of evidence. But the timestamps on their copy don't match the real ones from the bank security system. Someone altered them. More murmurs. Whitaker's eyes narrowed as he turned to Daniels. Is this true? Daniels hesitated. Noah wasn't done. I also have an affidavit from the bank security technician, confirming that the footage was accessed after the alleged crime took place. Daniels' face paled. That doesn't mean the footage is fake. Noah raised a hand. Oh, but it does. You see, counselor, the footage shows Mr. Jameson withdrawing money at 8:45 p.m. But according to the real security logs, the cameras were offline at that exact time for routine maintenance. Silence. Pin drop silence. Noah turned back to the jury, his voice calm but firm. Ladies and gentlemen, I ask you, how can a man be caught on camera at a time when the camera didn't exist? The jury exchanged looks. Daniel's hands curled into fists. Ms. Reynolds smirked. And Judge Whitaker? He was staring at Noah with something different now. Not mockery, not amusement, but respect. Noah took a slow breath. His opening move had landed, but the real fight was just beginning. The courtroom felt different now. The laughter, the whispers, the smug looks, they were gone. In their place was a thick, heavy silence, the kind that only comes when something big has just happened. Noah stood calmly, his hands resting on the defense table, watching as the prosecution scrambled. Daniels was flipping through the security logs again. His jaw clenched so tight, it looked like it might crack. Judge Whitaker, who had been mocking Noah just minutes ago, was staring at him like he was seeing him for the first time. Ms. Reynolds, standing near the back, smirked to herself, clearly enjoying the show. Noah kept his expression neutral, but inside, he felt it, the shift. They weren't laughing at him anymore. They were listening. Finally, Daniels slammed his folder shut. This doesn't prove anything, he said, his voice sharp. Just because the timestamps are off doesn't mean the footage was faked. There could have been a technical error. Noah tilted his head. You're right, he admitted. It could have been a technical error. Daniels smirked. But it wasn't. The smirk disappeared. Noah reached into his folder again and pulled out another sheet of paper. This is a signed statement from a forensic video analyst. He examined the footage and found evidence of digital manipulation. He turned to the judge. Your Honor, this proves that someone tampered with the video, which means the prosecution's entire case is built on a lie. Whitaker took the document from the clerk and skimmed it. His frown deepened. Daniels shifted uncomfortably. Even if the footage was edited, that doesn't mean my client didn't steal the money, he argued. There's still motive. He was in financial trouble, and the bank records show the money was taken from the account. Noah nodded. That's true. The money was withdrawn. Daniels raised a brow. So, you admit it? Noah smiled. Oh, I don't deny that the money left the account. I just deny that Mr. Jameson was the one who took it. Daniels rolled his eyes. Oh, right. So now you're saying it was someone else? Noah's smile widened. Exactly. The courtroom stirred. A few people leaned forward, intrigued. Judge Whitaker crossed his arms. Explain. Noah walked to the center of the room. The prosecution says Mr. Jameson had a motive, financial struggles. That part is true. He was behind on rent for the bookstore. But do you know what doesn't make sense? He paused, letting them wonder. Then, if Mr. Jameson was going to steal from the business account, why would he do it so obviously? Why would he use his own credentials at the bank, knowing there were cameras, knowing there were records? Daniel scoffed. Because he was desperate. Noah shook his head. No, desperate people make smart decisions. If he were really trying to steal, he would have done it in a way that couldn't be traced. But instead, this crime was designed to make him look guilty. Daniels frowned. What are you saying? Noah turned back to the jury. I'm saying this was a setup. Gasps rippled through the courtroom. Judge Whitaker narrowed his eyes. And do you have evidence to support this theory, Mr. Carter? Noah walked back to his table, flipping through his documents. Then he pulled out a bank statement and lifted it up. I do. Daniels let out a sharp breath. Let me guess, another coincidence? Noah ignored him and turned to the judge. Your Honor, the money was withdrawn from Mr. Jameson's account. But 2 hours later, it was transferred again. To another account. He placed the document on the clerk's desk. An account belonging to someone else. Daniels frowned and quickly snatched a copy. As he read, his face paled. The courtroom buzzed with murmurs. Whitaker tapped his gavel. Order. He turned to Noah. Who does the second account belong to? Noah exhaled. Then, he spoke the name. And the room exploded. Gasps. Shouts. People turning in their seats. A woman in the audience covered her mouth, eyes wide with shock. Daniels took a step back. That's... Noah nodded. The real thief. The judge's eyes darkened. Daniels fumbled for words. Your Honor, this doesn't prove anything. The account owner could have received the money after it was stolen. That doesn't mean they did it. Noah walked back to the defense table, adjusting his tie. Then I suppose you won't mind if we subpoena their financial records, he said smoothly. Daniels went silent. The audience was still buzzing, people whispering furiously. And that's when the doors slammed open. Everyone turned. 2 uniformed officers entered, walking with purpose. A man in a suit followed behind them, his face unreadable. Noah knew who he was. The chief investigator. He turned to Judge Whitaker and gave a short nod. Then he turned to Daniels. Counselor, he said calmly, we need to have a word. Daniels' face lost all color. The audience fell into stunned silence. Noah watched as the weight of everything crashed down. The judge, the jury, even the prosecutor. They all realized it. This wasn't just a case anymore. This was a scandal. And Noah had just cracked it. Judge Whitaker exhaled slowly, staring at Noah with an unreadable expression. Then, after a long silence, he nodded. Court is adjourned. The gavel slammed. And just like that, everything changed. The moment Judge Whitaker slammed the gavel, chaos erupted. The courtroom was no longer a place of order. It was a storm. Reporters rushed to the doors, frantically dialing their phones. Spectators murmured in frantic whispers, some standing just to get a better look. The prosecutor, Mr. Daniels, looked like someone had yanked the ground out from under him. And Noah? He remained perfectly still, his expression unreadable. The two officers made their way toward the prosecution table. The chief investigator, a sharp-eyed man in a gray suit, stepped forward, holding a thick folder in his hands. "Mr. Daniels," he said calmly, flipping through the pages, "we've been reviewing some concerning financial records over the past few months. We were prepared to bring it to the court's attention after this case was closed." His sharp gaze shifted to Noah. "But it seems the defense got there first." Daniels' throat bobbed. I don't know what you're talking about." The investigator held up a document. "Then I assume you have no problem explaining why money from the allegedly stolen business account ended up in your personal savings?" The courtroom gasped. Noah didn't react. He had known. He had suspected from the very beginning that something about this case felt too easy. A cut-and-dry robbery? A single suspect? Security footage that just happened to show the crime? It was a setup. And now, the man who orchestrated it was cornered. Daniel's face twisted in panic. That's not. I didn't." The chief investigator turned to the judge. "Your Honor, we request that Mr. Daniels be taken in for questioning immediately." Judge Whitaker's gaze flickered between Daniels and the officers. His jaw was tight, his mind clearly racing. Then, finally, he sighed. "Do it." The officers stepped forward. "No, wait," Daniels stammered, raising his hands as they grabbed his arms. "This is a misunderstanding." His voice cracked as he struggled. "You can't do this. He's a kid." Noah arched a brow. "A kid who just proved you're a criminal." Daniel's face went beet red. The officers didn't give him another chance to argue. They hauled him away, dragging him through the courtroom doors as cameras flashed and reporters shouted questions. Noah stood motionless, watching as the man disappeared. Only when the doors shut behind them did he exhale. The chief investigator turned back to the courtroom. "We'll be conducting a full inquiry into this case, but as of now," he turned to Mr. Jameson, "the defendant is cleared of all charges." Applause erupted. Mr. Jameson gasped. His watery eyes turned to Noah, his hands trembling. "Noah, son, I don't know what to say." Noah gave him a small smile. "You don't have to say anything, Mr. Jameson. You're free." The old man's face crumpled. He pulled Noah into a tight embrace, his grip shaky with emotion. The courtroom watched, some people smiling, others wiping their eyes. It was over. He had won. But as the adrenaline began to fade, Noah noticed something. Judge Whitaker was still staring at him, and there was something in the judge's eyes, something unreadable. Respect? Doubt? Or something else entirely? Noah wasn't sure. But what he did know was this. This case had changed everything, and the world wasn't about to forget his name. That night, Noah sat alone on the rooftop of his apartment building, looking over the city. The glow of the streetlights stretched endlessly before him, but his mind wasn't on the view. It was on what came next. His victory had made headlines. Social media was exploding. "Teen lawyer defends innocent man and wins" was plastered across every news station. People were calling him a prodigy, a legal genius, a phenomenon. But he didn't feel like any of those things. He just felt tired. The wind ruffled his hair as he leaned back against the railing. He knew this wasn't the end. There would be more cases, more challenges, more people who didn't believe in him. And that was fine. Because if today had proven anything, it was this. Noah Carter was unstoppable. Or so he thought. Because as he sat there, lost in thought, his phone buzzed. A message from an unknown number. He frowned and opened it. "You're impressive. But this was just the beginning. Be careful who you trust. Not everyone wants to see you win." Noah's breath hitched. His heart pounded. He stared at the message, his mind racing. Who sent this? And more importantly, what were they warning him about? Noah stared at his phone, his fingers tightening around the edges. The words on the screen felt like a ghost whispering in his ear. "You're impressive. But this was just the beginning. Be careful who you trust. Not everyone wants to see you win." The night air felt colder now. His pulse drummed in his ears. He looked around the rooftop, but he was alone. Still, the eerie feeling that someone was watching him crept up his spine. Slowly, he tapped the screen. "Who is this?" he typed back. For a moment, nothing happened. Then, delivered. No typing bubble. No response. He waited. and waited. Nothing. Noah exhaled sharply, locking his phone and slipping it into his pocket. He had dealt with doubters before. He had faced people who wanted to see him fail. But this was different. This was personal. And he didn't like that one bit. The next morning, Noah woke up to the sound of knocking on his apartment door. Bang, bang, bang. His eyes snapped open. Lily, still in her pajamas, peeked her head out from her bedroom. "Noah," she mumbled sleepily. "Who's that?" Noah rubbed his face and checked the clock. 6:30 a.m. Way too early for visitors. He climbed out of bed, still in the clothes from last night, and shuffled to the door. His muscles were stiff from sleeping in the wrong position, but his mind was already alert. Slowly, he turned the knob and cracked the door open, and immediately wished he hadn't. Standing in the dim hallway was a man in a dark suit, his expression unreadable. He wasn't a cop, not a reporter, not anyone Noah recognized, but his presence alone screamed power. The man smiled faintly. "Good morning, Mr. Carter." Noah kept the door halfway shut. "Who are you?" The man tilted his head. "Someone very interested in your future." Noah's grip tightened on the door. "Not an answer." The man chuckled. "Fair enough." He reached into his pocket and pulled out a business card, slipping it through the gap in the door. "Let's just say I represent people who see potential in you." Noah hesitated, then took the card. It was blank except for a phone number and a name. Arthur Graves. Noah's mind raced. He had heard that name before. But where? "You have a talent, Mr. Carter," Arthur continued. "And talent like yours? It doesn't go unnoticed. You shook the system with one case. Imagine what you could do with the right resources." Noah narrowed his eyes. "Resources?" Graves smirked. "Connections. Protection. Power." Something in the way he said power sent a chill through Noah's spine. He took a slow breath. "And what do you want in return?" Graves smiled wider. You're smart. I like that." He tapped the edge of the door lightly. "We'll talk soon. Think about it." Then, just like that, he turned and walked away, his footsteps fading down the hall. Noah stared at the business card, his mind spinning. By noon, the entire city was still talking about the case. News stations couldn't get enough of it. Online forums were filled with debates. And outside Noah's apartment, reporters were already gathering, hoping to get a statement from the teen prodigy attorney. Noah didn't care about any of that. His focus was on the name, Arthur Graves. He sat at his laptop, typing quickly. His fingers moved with precision, pulling up every legal database he had access to. If this guy was important, his name would be somewhere. Then there it was. Arthur Graves. A powerful name in legal circles, but not in the way most people would think. He wasn't a lawyer. He was a fixer. A man who worked in the shadows, cleaning up problems for the rich and powerful. If someone got caught doing something illegal, Graves was the one they called. If evidence needed to disappear, Graves handled it. Noah leaned back in his chair, exhaling. So why was he interested in him? Was this a warning? A threat? Or worse, an offer? His fingers hovered over his phone. Should he call the number? Ignore it? Before he could decide, his laptop pinged. A new email. From an anonymous sender. Noah frowned and clicked it open. There was no message, just an attachment. A video file. Hesitant, he clicked play. The footage was grainy, but clear enough. It was a surveillance camera recording. A timestamp in the corner showed that it was from 2 nights ago. At first, it was just an empty office. Then, a man walked in. Noah leaned forward, his pulse quickening. It was Daniels, the corrupt prosecutor from his case. He was on the phone, pacing back and forth. Though the audio was muffled, Noah could make out a few words. "Took the bait. Kid's too smart. They'll figure it out soon." Noah's blood ran cold. Then, another man entered the frame. Noah's breath hitched. It was Arthur Graves. The conversation continued, too quiet to fully hear. But then, Daniels nodded, pulled a thick envelope from his jacket, handed it to Graves. A bribe. And then, the final words came through clearly. Daniels, whispering, "If he keeps digging, we'll have to shut him down." The video ended. Noah stared at the screen, his mind spinning. Daniels had been working with Graves this entire time? And now, Graves was at his door? His stomach twisted. This wasn't just a legal battle anymore. This was something bigger. And if he wasn't careful, it could cost him everything. Noah's hands hovered over the keyboard, his breath unsteady. The video on his screen replayed in his mind like a broken record. Daniels. Graves. A bribe. A warning. If he keeps digging, we'll have to shut him down. He swallowed hard. They weren't talking about just anyone. They were talking about him. His heart pounded as his fingers twitched toward his phone. He had to tell someone. But who? The police? Maybe. The media? Too risky. Ms. Reynolds? His stomach twisted at the thought. She had been there in the courtroom. She had seen it all. But was she someone he could trust? His phone buzzed, snapping him out of his thoughts. A new message. Unknown number. Have you thought about my offer? Noah's throat tightened. Arthur Graves. He gritted his teeth and typed back. Noah, not interested. A few seconds passed. Then, another message. Unknown number. That's disappointing. Be careful, Mr. Carter. You're walking a dangerous path. Noah's fingers curled around his phone. A threat. It was subtle, wrapped in polite words, but he knew exactly what it meant. This wasn't just about his case anymore. Someone wanted to silence him, and they weren't going to stop. The next day, Noah kept his head low as he walked to the bookstore. He had barely slept. Every noise outside his window had made his heart jump. He wasn't paranoid, but after everything, he couldn't afford to ignore the feeling in his gut. Something was wrong. When he stepped into the bookstore, the familiar scent of old paper greeted him. Mr. Jameson was behind the counter, stacking books, but when he looked up and saw Noah, his expression softened. Kid, he said, shaking his head, you should be resting. You've been all over the news. Noah forced a smile. Could say the same about you. Jameson chuckled, but there was something behind his eyes, worry. You okay, son? He asked, voice lower now. Noah hesitated. He wanted to tell him, wanted to spill everything about Graves, the video, the warning, but something stopped him. He couldn't drag Jameson into this, not after everything. So he just nodded. Yeah, just thinking about what's next. Jameson studied him for a moment, then sighed. You remind me of myself when I was younger. Noah blinked. I thought you were always a bookstore guy. Jameson smirked. I was a journalist once, kid. He leaned on the counter. I chased the truth, dug up stories people wanted buried. And you know what I learned? Noah shook his head. Jameson's smirk faded. The truth is dangerous. A cold chill ran through Noah's veins. Jameson exhaled, then placed a hand on his shoulder. But it's also the only thing that matters. Noah swallowed. Even if it puts you in danger? Jameson's eyes darkened. Especially then. That night, Noah sat on his bed, staring at the business card. Arthur Graves. He traced the name with his thumb. There were two choices. Walk away. Forget about the video. Forget about the warning. Pretend none of this happened. Or, dig deeper. Find out the truth. Expose the people pulling the strings. His chest tightened. He already knew what he was going to do. His fingers moved on their own, pulling up his laptop. He connected to a private server and started searching. Every case Arthur Graves had ever been involved in. Every connection. Every client. The deeper he went, the worse it got. Bribery. Fraud. Missing witnesses. And one name that kept showing up. A judge. Noah's breath hitched. His stomach dropped. It was a name he knew. A name everyone in the courtroom had known. A name that had mocked him, doubted him, underestimated him. Judge Whitaker. Noah stared at the screen, his heart hammering. Arthur Graves wasn't just a fixer. He was covering for corrupt judges. And the man who had tried to humiliate Noah in court was one of them. Noah leaned back, rubbing his hands over his face. This was bigger than he thought. And now, he wasn't sure if he was fighting just for justice, or if he was fighting to stay alive. Noah sat frozen, his laptop screen glowing in the darkness of his room. The name stared back at him. Judge Whitaker. His mind raced. Arthur Graves wasn't just a fixer for criminals. He was connected to corrupt judges. And the very man who had mocked him, who had doubted him in that courtroom, was part of it. A wave of nausea rolled through Noah's stomach. Judge Whitaker had tried to humiliate him. And when that didn't work, when Noah won, Graves had appeared at his door, acting friendly. It wasn't a coincidence. It was a warning. His fingers clenched into fists. This wasn't over. If Whitaker was involved, then Daniels wasn't the only one dirty. Noah knew what he had to do. The next morning, Noah sat in a quiet diner across from Ms. Reynolds. The place was nearly empty, save for an old man reading a newspaper in the corner. The smell of burnt coffee lingered in the air, but Noah barely noticed. Ms. Reynolds leaned back, stirring her tea, her expression unreadable. "You have that look," she said. Noah raised a brow. "What look?" "I just uncovered something dangerous, and I need a plan." Look. Noah huffed. "Is that obvious?" Reynolds smirked. "Only to people who know what to look for." She took a sip of her tea, then set the cup down. "So," Noah exhaled, "I think Whitaker is dirty." Reynolds didn't react, didn't gasp, didn't even flinch. Instead, she just tilted her head slightly. "What makes you say that?" Noah slid his phone across the table, showing her the research he had dug up. She scrolled through it slowly, her eyes sharp, taking in every detail. Then, finally, she set the phone down and folded her hands. "You're playing a dangerous game, Carter." Noah held her gaze. "I know." She tapped her fingers against the table, her eyes scanning the diner before she leaned in slightly. "If you're right about Whitaker, then you're up against more than just a corrupt judge." Noah frowned. "What do you mean?" Reynolds sighed, lowering her voice. "Judges like Whitaker? They don't act alone. They work in circles. If he's dirty, that means he has connections. People protecting him." Noah's stomach twisted. He had expected pushback. He had expected danger. But a whole network of corruption? Reynolds watched him carefully. "Are you sure you want to do this?" Noah swallowed hard. "No, but he had to." He nodded. "I don't have a choice." Reynolds studied him for a long moment. Then, she exhaled. "All right, kid." She reached into her pocket and slid something across the table. "A flash drive." Noah blinked. "What's this?" Reynolds smirked. "A head start." That night, Noah sat at his desk, staring at the flash drive in his hand. Reynolds had left the diner without explaining. Just one sentence. "You're smart. You'll figure it out." He plugged the drive into his laptop and opened the files. The screen filled with documents, audio files, even a few videos. And one file in particular made his breath stop. A bank transaction history. Noah's eyes darted over the numbers, his brain working faster than his body could keep up. Thousands of dollars. Transferred to Whitaker. From an account belonging to Arthur Graves. Noah's pulse spiked. This was it. Proof. Whitaker wasn't just corrupt, he was being paid. His head spun. He needed to act fast. He needed to get this out. Expose the truth before Whitaker or Graves figured out what he had. His fingers moved quickly, copying the files to his personal drive. Then, his phone buzzed. A new message. From unknown number. Noah's breath hitched as he clicked it open. "You don't know what you're playing with, kid. Drop it, or you'll regret it." His blood turned to ice. This wasn't just a warning anymore. This was a threat. Noah stared at the screen, his heart hammering. He had proof. But now, someone knew he had it. And if he wasn't careful, he might not live long enough to use it. Noah's fingers trembled around his phone as he reread the message. "You don't know what you're playing with, kid. Drop it, or you'll regret it." This wasn't like before. Before, they had tried to recruit him. Before, they had underestimated him. Now, they were scared. And scared people were dangerous. Noah took a slow, shaky breath and locked his phone. His eyes flicked back to the laptop screen, where Whitaker's bank records were still open. He had evidence. Real, solid evidence that Judge Whitaker was working with Arthur Graves. That the justice system itself was tainted. The truth was in his hands. But so was the danger. His mind raced. He needed a plan. He couldn't just sit on this information. Graves and Whitaker wouldn't let him. If they knew he had it, that meant they were already watching. Noah's stomach twisted. For the first time in his life, he realized something terrifying. This wasn't just about exposing the truth. This was about survival. The next morning, Noah didn't go to school. He couldn't. Instead, He sat in a quiet cafe, headphones in, hoodie up, going over everything. Every document, every video, every bank statement. The evidence was airtight. Whitaker was being paid off. Graves was orchestrating it. And Daniels, the corrupt prosecutor, was just one of many people caught in the web. Noah clenched his jaw. There was only one way to do this. He had to expose Whitaker publicly. If he went to the police, Whitaker's connections might bury it before it ever saw the light of day. If he went to the courts, the system would protect itself. No, this had to be bigger. It had to be something they couldn't cover up. Noah's fingers hovered over his phone. And then, he made the call. 30 minutes later, he was sitting across from an investigative journalist. Lisa Montgomery, one of the few reporters in the city who had never backed down from a story. Her dark brown eyes studied him carefully, fingers tapping against the table. "You understand what you're saying, right?" Noah nodded. "You're accusing a judge, a high-ranking judge, of corruption?" Noah slid the flash drive across the table. "I'm not accusing him. I'm proving it." Lisa exhaled sharply. She took the drive and looked at it like it was a ticking bomb. Because it was. This could blow up the entire system, she muttered. "That's the point," Noah said. Lisa sat back, rubbing her temples. "Kid, do you have any idea how dangerous this is?" Noah's stomach twisted, but he nodded. "Yeah, I do." Lisa studied him for a long moment. Then, she grabbed her bag and stood. "All right," she said. "Let's take down a judge." That night, Noah sat on his rooftop again, staring out at the city. The air was crisp. The lights below stretched endlessly. His phone buzzed. "Lisa, it's happening. The story goes live at midnight." Noah exhaled. This was it. Once the story broke, there was no turning back. Whitaker would be exposed. Graves would be cornered. Everything would change. Then, his phone buzzed again. A new message. "Unknown number. You made your choice." Noah's blood turned to ice. Before he could react, crack. A loud sound echoed in the night. Something fast, something sharp, something close. Noah's heart stopped. A second later, the metal railing next to him sparked. A bullet. Noah threw himself to the ground just as another shot whizzed past his head. His ears rang. His chest heaved. Someone was shooting at him. Noah scrambled to his feet and ran. Down the stairs. Through the emergency exit. Into the dark alley behind the building. His breath came in gasps, his pulse hammering. They weren't just threatening him anymore. They were trying to kill him. And the worst part? The story hadn't even gone live yet. This wasn't just about stopping him. It was about erasing him. Noah's fists clenched. They thought he'd be scared. They thought he'd back down. They thought wrong. Because now, this wasn't just about justice. This was war. Noah sprinted through the alley, his heart pounding against his ribs. The gunshots had stopped, but that didn't mean he was safe. He ducked behind a dumpster, pressing his back against the cold brick wall, his breath ragged, his ears strained for any sound. Footsteps, a car, anything. Silence. But that didn't mean he wasn't being watched. His fingers clenched around his phone. He had to move. He had to get out. He took a deep breath and bolted. Down the alley. Across the street. His sneakers slamming against the pavement as he disappeared into the night. 15 minutes later, Noah was sitting in the back of a diner, his hoodie pulled low over his face. His hands trembled as he wrapped them around a cup of coffee, the heat barely registering. Someone had just tried to kill him. Not scare him. Not threaten him. Kill him. His mind raced. The story was set to go live at midnight. If they were trying to take him out before that, it meant one thing. They knew. They knew about the article. They knew he was the source. And now, they were desperate. His phone vibrated on the table. A message from Lisa. "Lisa, something's wrong." Noah's stomach dropped. He typed back quickly. "Noah, what happened?" 3 dots appeared. Then, "Lisa, the website crashed. Someone's trying to kill the story." Noah's jaw clenched. They were fighting back. And if they had the power to shut down a major news outlet, this was bigger than just Whitaker. Bigger than Graves. Bigger than he had ever imagined. An hour later, Noah was in Lisa's office. The newsroom was quiet this late at night, but her desk was covered in notes, files, and her dead laptop. "This isn't a normal cyber attack," she muttered, typing furiously on an old desktop. Whoever did this knew exactly where to hit. Noah stood behind her, his hands gripping the back of a chair. "They're stalling," he said, "trying to buy time." Lisa exhaled. "We still have backup servers, but if they can crash our site, they can crash others too." She turned to him. "We need another way." Noah's mind spun. If they couldn't rely on the news site, then they needed something bigger. Something that couldn't be shut down. Then, it hit him. Social media. Lisa blinked. "What?" Noah grabbed his phone. "They can crash a website, but they can't stop a million people from sharing the truth." Lisa's eyes widened. "You want to leak it ourselves?" Noah nodded. "We go straight to the public. No filters. No edits. No delays." Lisa hesitated. "That's dangerous." Noah met her gaze. "So is getting shot at." Silence. Then, Lisa sighed, shaking her head. "Kid, you're insane." Noah smirked. "I know." She turned back to the computer. "All right, let's burn this whole system down." By 11:45 p.m., everything was ready. Noah's laptop and Lisa's desktop were both hooked up to multiple accounts: Twitter, Instagram, Reddit, every major platform. The evidence files were uploaded. The exposé was rewritten into a single, shareable document. And on Noah's phone? A pre-recorded video. One final message. Noah's fingers hovered over the keyboard. This was it. The moment they hit post, there was no going back. Lisa glanced at the clock. 2 minutes. Noah's pulse raced. His mouth was dry. Then, his phone vibrated. A new message. Unknown number. "If you press that button, you'll regret it." Noah froze. His breath hitched. Lisa frowned. "What is it?" He turned the phone toward her. She read the message and cursed under her breath. "They're watching us." Noah's hands tightened into fists. A cold, creeping fear slithered up his spine. They weren't bluffing. They weren't guessing. They knew exactly what he was about to do. And that meant someone was close. His head snapped toward the newsroom windows. The street outside was dark. Empty. Too empty. Lisa swore again. "We need to move." Boom. The front doors of the newsroom slammed open. 2 men stepped inside. Suits. Cold expressions. And guns. Lisa gasped. "Oh my God." Noah's heart nearly stopped. This wasn't a warning. This was a shutdown. And if they didn't act fast, they wouldn't make it out alive. The moment the 2 men stepped inside, Noah's instinct screamed. This wasn't like before. They weren't playing games. They weren't hiding behind text messages or cyber attacks. This was real. This was life or death. Lisa grabbed his arm. "Noah." He acted before she could finish. "Run." Noah grabbed the laptop and bolted. Lisa barely had time to react before she followed. The men shouted behind them, "Stop!" But they didn't wait to find out what would happen if they didn't. They ran through the dark newsroom, desks and chairs flying in their path as they sprinted toward the emergency exit. Footsteps pounded behind them. Too close. Too fast. They weren't just chasing them. They were hunting them. Noah yanked open the emergency exit and practically shoved Lisa through. The alley outside was damp, cold, and too quiet. Lisa gasped for breath. "Where?" Noah grabbed her wrist. "Keep moving." They sprinted down the alley, weaving through garbage bins and broken crates. The streets ahead were empty, but Noah's mind was racing. They couldn't outrun them forever. They needed an escape. Then, he saw it. A parked motorcycle. Keys still in the ignition. Noah didn't think. He grabbed the handlebars and swung his leg over. "Lisa, get on." She stared at him. "Are you insane?" Noah's pulse pounded. "Do you want to stay here and argue, or do you want to live?" Lisa cursed and jumped on. Noah twisted the keys. The engine roared. And just as the men burst into the alley, Noah gunned it. The motorcycle screeched forward, tires burning against the pavement as they tore down the street. Bullets whizzed past them. Lisa screamed. Noah gritted his teeth, leaning forward. The city blurred around them as they dodged cars, cutting through streets like a knife. The men weren't giving up. A black SUV appeared in the rearview mirror, its headlights glowing like a predator's eyes. Noah's heart nearly stopped. They weren't just chasing them. They were trying to run them down. The chase lasted minutes, but it felt like an eternity. Noah's knuckles turned white as he swerved between lanes, barely avoiding a collision. Lisa clung to him, her breath fast and panicked. The SUV was still behind them. They needed to lose them. Fast. Noah's mind raced. Think. Then, he saw it. A narrow alley up ahead. Too tight for a car. It was risky, but so was dying. Noah. Lisa's voice was tight. Hold on. And then, he turned sharply. The bike skidded into the alleyway, sparks flying as Noah barely kept it upright. The SUV tried to follow. Too big. Too slow. The alley swallowed them whole. The last thing Noah heard was the screech of tires and the crash of metal against brick as the SUV slammed into the wall. They didn't stop until they reached a run-down parking garage on the other side of the city. The moment Noah killed the engine, Lisa practically fell off. She paced, hands on her head, chest rising and falling. Holy. Noah slid off the bike, his own legs shaking. They had almost died. Lisa turned to him, eyes wild. What the hell was that? Noah ran a hand through his hair, trying to calm his own breathing. They wanted to shut us up. Lisa threw her hands in the air. Yeah, no kidding. She pointed at the bike. We just got shot at. Chased. Almost died. Noah met her gaze. And that means we're winning. Lisa froze. Her breathing slowed. Then, she cursed under her breath. They're desperate. Noah continued. They wouldn't be doing this if they weren't afraid. Lisa exhaled. So what now? Noah pulled out his phone. The backup files were still there. Safe. We finished this. By 1 a.m., the plan was in motion. The expose was uploaded. Not just to news sites. To everywhere. Twitter, Reddit, YouTube, Facebook, blogs, private forums. It spread like wildfire. Within minutes, people were sharing, commenting, calling out names. Whitaker, Graves, the entire corrupt network. And then, Noah went live. A single video message. His face was shadowed, but his voice was clear. This is Noah Carter. And if you're watching this, then you know the truth. They tried to silence me. They tried to kill me. But the truth is stronger than fear. Judge Whitaker is corrupt. Arthur Graves is his fixer. And they've been controlling the justice system for years. No more. This is just the beginning. He ended the stream. And then, he waited. By 3 a.m., the world exploded. Whitaker's name trended worldwide. The evidence was undeniable. Politicians, celebrities, everyday people. Everyone was talking about it. By 6 a.m., the FBI launched an official investigation. By 8 a.m., Whitaker resigned. By noon, Arthur Graves vanished. Noah sat in the quiet of Lisa's apartment, staring at the news on her TV. They had done it. They had won. Lisa collapsed onto the couch beside him, shaking her head. You're either the bravest person I've ever met, or the dumbest. Noah smirked. Probably both. She chuckled. So, what now? Noah exhaled. That was the question, wasn't it? His name was everywhere now. People were calling him a hero. But heroes didn't get to walk away. Not when there was still work to do. He looked at Lisa, and he smiled. Now, he said, we find the next case. But across the city, in a dark room, a phone rang. A man picked up. A deep voice spoke. Carter's still a problem. A pause. Then, not for long. The sun was barely up when Noah Carter stepped onto the streets of the city. His face was on every screen, his name in every headline. Teen lawyer takes down corrupt judge. Noah Carter exposes legal conspiracy. Youngest legal prodigy changes the system. People pointed when they saw him. Some whispered, others smiled. A few clapped. But Noah wasn't celebrating. Because he knew this wasn't over. Lisa was still asleep when Noah left her apartment, exhausted from everything they had been through. She had asked him the night before, what now? He had smiled. But he hadn't given her a real answer. Because the truth was, he didn't know. He had won the battle. But the war? That was still out there. Somewhere. Waiting. By noon, Noah was back at the bookstore. Mr. Jameson hugged him the second he walked in. You did it, son. His voice was thick with emotion. You changed everything. Noah smiled, but it didn't reach his eyes. Jameson pulled back, studying him. What's wrong? Noah hesitated. It's not over. Jameson nodded slowly. No, it never is. Noah ran a hand through his hair. I should be happy, right? We took down Whitaker. We exposed the truth. Jameson sighed, leading Noah to the old wooden table where they had spent so many nights buried in books. Let me tell you something, kid, he said, sitting down. The world doesn't change overnight. You cut off a snake's head, another one grows. That's just the way it is. Noah swallowed. So what's the point? Jameson smiled, slow and knowing. The point, he said, is that you decide whether to keep fighting. Noah sat in silence. He had spent his whole life wanting to prove himself, to show the world he wasn't just some kid. But this wasn't just about proving something anymore. This was about justice, and justice never rested. Noah looked down at the old wooden table, the same table where he had planned his first case. His hands clenched into fists. Then, his phone buzzed. A new email. No sender. No subject. Just a single line of text. You don't get to walk away. Noah's breath hitched. His grip tightened on the phone. And then, he smiled. Because they were right. He wasn't walking away. Not now. Not ever. Across the city, in a dark office, a man sat watching the news. Noah Carter's face filled the screen. The man exhaled, steepling his fingers. He's just a kid, someone in the room muttered. The man smirked. No, he said. He's a problem. Back in the bookstore, Noah stood up, rolling his shoulders. Mr. Jameson? The old man looked up. Yeah. Noah grabbed his bag. I think I just found my next case. Jameson chuckled. That's my boy. Noah smirked. And with that, he walked out the door, straight into the next fight.